Good morning, ladies and gents. Thanks for that introduction, Ingrid. Lucky I'm not a technical person, which is why I need to get someone to show me how to work a mouse. But what I try to do is interpret what's happening in the technical world in language that people can understand. And I find very often the best way to explain what's happening is to show the trends that are reshaping this world. And the trends are quite dramatic. So first I'm going to show you the data that's reshaping our digital world, and very dramatically right now. And then from there, I'll go into a personal journey that tells my own story about trying to go paper-free. But it obviously has a parallel in what's happening in the business world in general. So to start with, I want to show you the growth of the internet in South Africa from 1994, when it began commercially in this country, and then projecting it through to the end of this decade. Right now, you can see at the start of the green bars, which is this year, that we're in the midst of the most dramatic rise in internet use that we've ever seen in this country. By the end of this year, we'll have passed the 15 million mark of internet users in South Africa. That's closing in on the 1/3 penetration mark, which is quite a magical figure for a developing country. But then what you see after 2018 is that the graph flattens. Now that's based on a worst case scenario, and it assumes that there won't be significant moves from government or from the regulator to bring down the cost of data, or of course from the cell phone networks themselves, who tend to be the slowest in responding to price pressures. And we believe that there should be a ceiling on the cost of data to allow the mass market to come into this data environment and into what we're calling the digital decade, so that it allows for economic participation in the internet, but also provides the benefits that the internet and digital activity brings to any individual. A very key element of this graph is the fact that most people, when they first come onto the internet, are still very nervous of the environment, and they don't become active participants in this environment from the start. It takes several years to get used to it and to become those participants. And we call that the digital participation curve. And this is what it looks like. The green bars at the bottom are the internet user base pushed forward 5 years. So it shows exactly how many people have been online for 5 years or more in any given year. And you can see in 2013, when we had 13.8 million people on the internet, only 4.6 million of those had been online for 5 years or more. This year, that rises dramatically to 5.3 million out of the 15.6 million that will be online. So a third of the people who are online this year will be experienced internet users. Why that's important for almost any business that is now doing business over the web is that it means that the majority of the market out there is not yet ready to do business with them online, but it is reaching a critical mass. That 4.6 million last year and the 5.3 million this year is now suddenly a critical mass of internet users. If you go back about 14 years to the year 2000, you'll see it was very low, 2.4 million internet users in 2000, and 2001, 2.8 million. But even that was regarded as a critical mass, and a lot of companies invested heavily in targeting that audience. What I didn't understand was that the real addressable market back then was only around 100,000, and then 200,000 in the year 2000, and then 350,000 in 2001. That's not a critical mass, but that's what all this heavy investment was being thrown at. So we had our own version of the tech bubble back in 2000 and 2001. But now, finally, it's really happening. And what we're really seeing now is dramatic growth in the number of experienced users. And I'm going to show you what the graph looks like when we extrapolate it another 5 years forward. Look at 2013, 4.6 million, 2014, 5.3 million, and then look how it keeps rising for the rest of this decade. So the rest of this decade is seeing dramatic increase in the number of people who are experienced users of the internet. They've been online for 5 years or more, and therefore potentially participants in the digital economy. This is the market that is ready for interacting online. This is the market that's ready to move away from paper, if they're allowed to, if they find the right reason to, and if they find the tools that help the digital environment makes as much sense as the paper environment did in the past. But now really is the time for a paper-free environment. This is what the mobile environment looks like, and this is partly what's driving that internet user base. So the first 3 columns, or the first 4 columns, are each of the mobile networks and their numbers of subscriptions, not customers. They like to say this is how many customers we have. That's actually a little white lie, because it's not the number of subscriptions, it's the number of connections. And when you add it up, you can see the clue. So end of last year, 69 million connections. Clearly, they're not 69 million customers. So most of those, or most of the excess, let's call it, are in fact machine-to-machine connections, like tracking devices, and that includes cars, computers, and even livestock. The ostriches in Oudtshoorn, for example, are tracked through GSM SIM cards. So a lot of those users are actually ostriches. The actual number of human beings that have cell phones in South Africa and are using them is around 41 million. It's around 80% penetration of the population. But those 41 million are very rapidly moving into the smartphone era. And let me show you what that looks like. This is the middle of last year, and already then we had a dramatic smartphone user base, 14.7 million smartphones in use in this country, close to 30% of the population using smartphones. Some people like to argue or joke that BlackBerry isn't a smartphone, but of course BlackBerry invented the smartphone as we know it today, long before Apple came along. So they still have a very deep penetration in this market, and they're usually popular still amongst the youth. So there's still a very strong user base, and it's still growing, believe it or not, in South Africa, but very, very slowly. Nokia is the old Symbian 60, what we used to call the office phones, like the E72 and all of those phones. Any of you still use a Nokia office phone? It's not a crime, I promise you. But every time I speak, the proportion of an audience using those phones goes down. BlackBerry users here? There's a few that admit it, the rest are just too shy. Apple iPhone users? And then Android users. You can see where this is going. So that Android number, 3.2 million, looks like it's a bit low, but compared to where it was a year before, Android was about half that level, in fact below half that level just a year before. So the rise of Android up to the middle of last year was dramatic. And then iPhone is usually only the upper end of the market that can afford it. That's why its penetration is so low. But now look what happens in just 1 year. This is what we expect just after the middle of this year. Close to 6 million Android phones in this market. So Android almost doubles in a year, and it will reflect what you're seeing in this room. BlackBerry remaining stable, still strong, but beginning to decline. Nokia declining rapidly. Probably a year from now, you'll see very few of those Nokia office phones in the market. But what you will see is the rise of the Nokia Lumia phones, which you can see more than doubled in a year, from 600,000 to 1.4 million. And the big driver of the Lumia is one single device, the Nokia Lumia 520, which costs less than 2,000 Rand. It's the cheapest Windows smartphone on the market, and it's taken the South African market by storm, and in fact it's Nokia's biggest seller worldwide. So watch them. They're going to come up with a few more tricks in the next while. And iPhone will keep growing steadily, but it's never going to be dominant in this market as it is in the United States. But look at the top line, the number of smartphones in the market, 17 million. That passes the 1/3 penetration mark. And that is really huge. And internet access will follow from smartphone access. And as smartphones come down in price, more of the mass market will be using Android phones in particular. Right now, you can get an MTN stepper for $499. You can get a Huawei Y220, I think it is, for $449. And you can be sure in the next year there'll be more models coming out from the likes of Samsung and so on, also below 500 Rand. And a year from now, the price point will drop to below 400 Rand. When you have smartphones selling at below 400 Rand, there's no point buying a feature phone for 300 Rand. So we're going to see rapid migration over the next few years towards smartphones. And suddenly the population is a digital population. So it all points to a paper-free world, you'd think. And you'd assume that based on that, paper is dead. But look at what the economists found. In the past 3 decades, paper usage has increased by 50%. And this is the era of the greatest computerization and the greatest access to computers that the world has ever seen. Yet, paper just keeps growing. And The Age in Australia came up with a very clear answer for that. The billions of new pages on the web are providing us with even more stuff that's worth printing out. And the more people print stuff out, the more other people copy that stuff as well. I find that it's almost a lost battle trying to convince people not to give me paper printouts when I go into meetings. Everyone's sitting around a table with a laptop or a tablet, and yet paper is still being distributed. The reality is that we all need an aha moment before we make that migration. We're ready for it, we have the tools for it, the market has the tools for it, but the market is still stuck in traditional ways of doing things. The average person still wants to do things the way they always did. You need a catalyst. If there isn't a catalyst to change the way you do things, you're always going to do things the same way you did before. Sometimes the catalyst is just seeing how someone else operates. Visiting a company, for example, and seeing how streamlined their processes are, and that suddenly wakes you up to what you should be doing in your business. For example, watching Al Gore presentations about paper destroying the rainforest or creating global warming is not going to change people's minds about how they operate within their own offices. There are many inconvenient truths about the ills of using paper, but giving people the bad news is not enough to convince them. It takes what I call, well, what many people call an aha moment, but what I experienced as an aha moment to make you realize that there are more efficient ways of doing things. Not just cost-effective ways, but also space-effective ways, and what I like to think of as sanity-effective ways. And I'll explain now why sanity is such an important part of this. And I'm going to share my own experience with moving out of the physical environment as an office environment. I had a deadline, as Karen Vixen said, I had a farm in Africa. Well, I had a deadline in Africa. And that was my last Urban Legends book, which is now called The Burglar in the Bin Bag. And it's out of print. I'm almost pleased to tell this audience, but it's available as an ebook through Penguin Books. But writing that book was one of the great nightmares of my life. This is sort of what my office looked like. And I actually had to hire someone just to sort out my files, which sounds crazy. Why must you hire somebody just to get your information in order that's supposed to be at your fingertips? But once she had filed everything, I never went back into those files. I kept finding the material I needed in my own computer or on the internet. But the more you file stuff, the more you want to file stuff. And as I try to go into the files and try to create a logical system for writing the book, I found that it just took more and more and more time to work through the paperwork. And journalists like to talk about the sound of deadlines whooshing past and how they love that sound. That's how it felt for me. And my book was already a few months past deadline. My deadline had been extended, and I had about 2 weeks to go. But this is what happens. When you encourage paper, it just keeps coming back to you because the paper realizes that you like it, so it's attracted to you, and it keeps piling up more and more. And the more material I collected for the book, the further the deadline receded, and the more, let's say, tense my publisher got with me. And that's how, more or less what I looked like back then. I didn't have as much hair as this guy, but that was pretty much my pose when I was in a creative phase. But luckily, computer technology had evolved beyond the plain typewriter. The typewriter now had a mouse, and it had storage. Now, this isn't me at work, but this is exactly what happened when I went to back up my entire hard drive at my online backup provider. I won't name names, but it was crazy that you had to go in to someone's offices, connect your laptop to their servers, and then sit there for a few hours while you transferred your tens of gigs, never mind hundreds of gigs that one might have today, but just tens of gigs of data across, and then hope that you never have a crash, because then you've got to go back in there and you've got to go through the same process to download the stuff again. It was an incredibly efficient way of operating. This is our foolproof methodology at that time, to make sure that nothing is lost, because once you produce a paragraph of writing, you can never reproduce it if it's not saved. So save after every paragraph. Print out everything you've produced at the end of each day so that you have a paper backup. And most important, automated backups overnight. That was the key to us being incredibly smug about what we did from a research point of view in Worldwide Works, but also in my own writing and introducing that book at the time. And there's a date that sticks in my mind forever because it was so traumatic. 19th of January 2010 at 4:29 p.m., a little man climbed into my computer and took what must have been an ice pick or something and slashed away at my hard drive. That's when the recovery guys looked at my hard drive, that's what it looked like. But a pin dropped onto my hard drive, tore into it, and in fact, it was completely irretrievable. My hard drive really was as good as toast. They couldn't recover anything from it. The significance of 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon was that our backups were all done overnight. Our printouts were all done at the end of the day when the work was finished. And when you're 2 weeks away from deadline on a book, every 12 hours of work produces a massive amount of output, and critical output. That's when you do your best work, when you write on deadline. So an entire chapter and a half of the book was completely lost. There was no way to retrieve it whatsoever, aside from rewriting it. And I couldn't remember what I'd written. And I had to climb back into those paper files. I had to go back through that same old process, head in hands most of the time. It was deeply traumatic. It was a week from deadline, actually. A full day's work lost. The piles of files were a taunting reminder. And that's the day the catalyst happened at Worldwide Works. And literally overnight, we climbed into the cloud. So this is the new methodology, and this is for a small business. So for larger businesses here, it wouldn't work exactly this way, and every business has a different process. But the principles are the same for any organization. So we invested in virtual tools that would ensure that as we work, everything is not just saved on a local drive or server, but also saved remotely. And there are many tools that do that. I think you'll see some of those today, but some of the more high-profile ones obviously are Microsoft's OneDrive and Google's new enterprise cloud service, but also Google Drive has something similar. Dropbox is kind of a semblance of it, but it's really for document sharing. It's not really an ideal tool for live storage and literally live updates. So everything is backed up in the cloud as it is saved. It's an obvious approach for any organization, but just 4 years ago, it was a revelation to us that we should be doing that. I actively request people not to give me paper. At that time, I subscribed to 5 newspapers. I went through every one every day with scissors in hand and collected clippings that could be used towards our research reports, towards books, etc. That simply doesn't happen anymore, and I now subscribe to 1 newspaper a day, mainly for old times' sake. And the only rule that we have to remember internally is that you save not just after every paragraph, but after every sentence, so nothing is ever lost. And ironically, after I put together this presentation, I got a call last night from my editor on Gadget magazine. We publish Gadget magazine online. And my editor is Sean Bacher. You might have seen his columns on new apps and new peripherals that appears every week. He said his MacBook just crashed completely. Nothing is retrievable. So I started, this was on a WhatsApp message, by the way. I started typing back to him and I said, I hope you're in the cloud. And his very next message, before I could even type mine, is, thank goodness for the cloud. And then I said, that's fantastic. Did you lose anything? And his response was, 0 lost, 0 irretrievable. And he just carried on working, pulled up another computer that he had spare, and he connected to the cloud and he carried on working. It wasn't an issue. 4 years ago, it was a crisis. Today, it's not an issue. So it's not only about the paper. It's about freedom from the physical environment. When you rely on the hard drive, when you rely on paper storage, backup, documentation, you're tying yourself to the physical world. The moment you go for virtual tools, whether it's backup or tools of the kind that you're seeing here today, you're freeing yourself from the physical world. And the reduction in stress levels is quite astonishing. This is what happened next. This is probably a bit of an exaggeration, but it took several trips to the dump to get rid of all the paperwork that we decided to get rid of. There literally were piles and piles of files for every single research project we worked on that we never accessed. We just kept piling up more. And every few years we would take the bottom section of the pile, knowing that we hadn't retrieved it for a few years, and we'd throw that away. This time we threw everything away. And the guys at the dump down the road were quite astonished. They'd seldom seen so much paper coming from private individuals into their dumping area. And of course, the sappy recycling guys as well, their bags were overflowing. They also were quite startled. It was a weird scene, but it was so liberating. And today, that's my office. That's how it feels. That's a stylized version of it, but I can literally be standing in the middle of Times Square or Leicester Square, and I'm in my office. But more than that, look what's coming next. In the future, you're going to have a wrist-based device. Right now, it's fitness-oriented, activity-oriented, and health monitoring oriented. But just in a few years' time, the kind of wristbands that you're seeing now that tie in to your smartphone are going to not just be devices to access your smartphone information, but also to transmit information further on. And this is the kind of environment you're going to have. Thanks to the device on your wrist that's connected via the cloud to all your data that's lying somewhere, you'll be able to transmit onto almost any surface. And there will be many smart surfaces that you can connect via Bluetooth or the future versions of Bluetooth from this wrist-based device, link it up, and you can be like the guy from Minority Report. Quite a few of you obviously are far better looking than that guy, so I won't mention Tom Cruise. But Tom Cruise's Minority Report really was a great example of what the future office looks like, but not confined to his offices. Anywhere where there's a smart surface becomes your office. It really is liberation from dead trees, but also from these kind of disastrous crashes, and also loss of devices to theft and to other causes. It's liberation from the physical world that we're talking about here. So the big question is, are we headed for a paper-free world? Will paper go away? And do all of these arguments mean that the digital citizen of tomorrow will be a paper-free citizen? And the answer is no. It's probably not going to happen. We see paper increase, more information increases. But you yourselves can take the decision to be free from the physical world of the office. Right now, I'm actually at my office. Here's my office. If I go back to my physical office, that's still my office. I can go sit in a restaurant here and I'll be in my office. But only if I want to be. So I'm not necessarily tied to my office. A lot of people feel But if you're taking your office with you everywhere, you never can escape from your office. But that also is a choice. And it's about discipline, both in focusing on your work, but also discipline in focusing on escaping from your work. So it's up to you. But if you need it, it's there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.